I'd like to call everybody to attention and welcome you all in person to Confirm. And I guess it's not quite our first event here, but it's our first attempt with actual physical people in the building. So, look, you're here in a very momentous day for ourselves. But listen, I'd like to welcome you all here, both physically and online. And I'd like to hand you over to Professor Nolan Kennedy to get things started. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. You're all very welcome to the afternoon of our Research Week, and I'm delighted, as with John, to welcome you all here to the Confirm HQ, and very much welcome to our virtual audience as well. I'd just like to encourage you, particularly the virtual audience, to post questions in the Q&A as we go through our session today. And today's panel features early career researchers across academia, industry and the public sector who will explore their careers in science. And in addition, our speakers have connection to UL's various SFI, Science Foundation Ireland funded research centres, so Confirm, LERO and SSPC, as well as our Barnall Institute. Now, unfortunately, we have a slight change to our lineup this afternoon, as unfortunately Dr. Ibrahim Aminu is unable to join us today. But before I introduce our panellists, I'd like to welcome Professor Philip Nolan, the Director General of Science Foundation Ireland, to open the session. And during 2020 and 2021, as you will all know, Professor Nolan was, centrally involved in all our lives, as we met with him daily on television, as he was centrally involved in the management of the COVID-19 pandemic as a member of the National Public Health Emergency Team in chairing its disease modelling subgroup. So, as well as that, Philip is a member of the Royal Irish Academy and an honorary fellow of the Faculty of Public Health Medicine of the Royal College of Physicians of Ireland. And we're very much delighted to have Professor Nolan here this week with us today as part of Research Week. And I'd just like to say, because my children insisted that I say this, that they were so excited at the prospect of me having Philip Nolan in my car today. That really has been the highlight of the weekend. So Philip, I think I speak for all of us when I talk about how familiar we all feel with you, and I particularly enjoyed your live 95 FM interview today, when I think Joe Nash really got to the heart of some of the questions all of us were curious about you as a very public figure that you are now, Philip. But I'm delighted to have you here today as Director General of Science Foundation Ireland. So I'll welcome you, Paul, for a few words.
Gurmag agus bhálam fáilte chomh go léir chuig an chomhrá tábhachtach seo. Thanks very much, Nordy, and I'm really happy to welcome you to this important conversation. The nature of how we are as a society has changed so much in the last 40 years that the nature of a career in research or a career in science has also changed. So, when I was starting out, there were significant opportunities in academia, some opportunities in enterprise, and not a whole lot beyond that. Now, so much of what we do as a society is so dependent on a very broad spectrum of research knowledge, right through science and engineering, humanities and social sciences. I shouldn't say even, I want to emphasize, in fact, the role of the humanities. Over the last 2 years, we've struggled to understand what's going on and even explain it to ourselves. And it hasn't just been the scientists that have helped explain things. It has been the social scientists who have helped explain things, but very important scholars in the humanities giving us new ways to think about what's going on in our world and what's going on within ourselves. So there's a wonderful array of opportunities available to you, and I'm really delighted to be here for this conversation for two reasons. First of all, the only way to navigate a career in research is to talk to other people about their careers and understand what their careers have been. And I can tell you my career has been long and varied, and none of it particularly well planned, and most of it not anticipated. So prepare to be surprised, because that's a wonderful thing, but also prepare by having the sorts of conversations that we're going to have here today. And the second thing I would say, it's important for me as a research funder and for us as institutions to understand what needs to be done in a career that's full of steps and changes and progressions and steps sideways sometimes and steps on. What should we be doing as institutions and funders to create at least some sense of stability and support as people build their careers. So I'm more than interested in hearing what you have to say about your careers in research, because not only is that going to be of interest to people here who are planning their careers, but it'll be of interest to us in terms of what more can we do as funders and institutions to support people in planning their careers and planning their futures. Because what you're going to do in the future will be vital, not only in academia, and not only in academia and enterprise, but our whole public policy system will and should change over the coming decades. So many more doctorally and postdoctorally trained people will be involved in the formation of public policy right across the spectrum of public policy. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say and to taking note of it so that we can use it within our own planning. Thank you very much indeed.
It's wonderful. Thank you very much, Philip. And I think we certainly can resonate, what you've said resonates particularly with myself and with many other people in the room, I'm sure. What's going to happen now is I'm just going to introduce each of the panel members, and then I'm going to just start by posing a few questions to them and getting their thoughts. As Philip said, we're very keen to hear from their perspectives, and I'd really encourage, engagement from yourselves. So I'll look then to the members of the audience for questions that you may have, and we'll have it like a very, casual, informal discussion, but certainly, encouraging interaction. And similarly, we'll have Q&A and some questions from our live panel as well. So without further ado, let me introduce our wonderful panel here this afternoon. And I'm going to start with Dr. Sarah Guerin, who's a member of SSPC and part of the Department of Physics at the University of Limerick, and also a member of the Bernal Institute. And Sarah was a very worthy recipient of a prestigious European Research Council Starting Investigator grant this year. She currently works on both in silico and ex silico engineering of biomolecular crystals, primarily for application areas in eco-friendly sensing and pharmaceuticals. Dr. Guerin has been successful in securing over €2 million of funding from national and international sources for the development of organic piezo device components. She currently works at a large number of international research groups as a world leader in computationally predicting the electromechanical properties of novel molecular crystals. She's been awarded the British Association of Crystal Growth Young Scientist of the Year Award and the IEEE Dilys Das Gupta Memorial Award. You're very welcome, Sarah. We're delighted to have you. Next on the panel is Dr. Owen Hinchey, a lecturer in digital manufacturing and automation in the School of Engineering at the University of Limerick. Owen obtained an honours Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering degree from UCD in 2011, and he was successfully awarded an IRC Enterprise Partnership Scheme PhD scholarship researching the repair process of aircraft turbine components with project partners Lufthansa Technik Turbine Shannon in 2012, graduating in 2016. Owen joined the medical device sector in 2016, researching advanced manufacturing technologies with Johnson & Johnson, before returning to UL as a postdoctoral researcher with Confirm in 2018. Owen's research focuses on digital manufacturing and automation, with a focus on digital twin, robotics, and additive-based manufacturing technology. In late 2019, Owen was successfully awarded an SFI Industry Fellowship with Analog Devices. And Owen is now an academic collaborator with Confirm and is also a certified KUKA robot and Universal Robot Cobot programmer. Welcome, Owen. We're delighted to have you also. Next on our panel is Dr. Fiola Peters, who is a data and analytics developer in Johnson & Johnson. And prior to joining Johnson & Johnson, Fiola was a postdoctoral researcher with LERO, our SFI Centre for Software. So Dr. Peters conducted her PhD research on data sharing for cross-project defect prediction in software engineering. Her research focused on exploring adaptive data privacy, data sharing, and data mining for users of software applications, specifically allowing users to consider the trade-off between the benefits of data sharing and potential privacy breaches. She has presented at top software engineering conferences like the International Conference on Software Engineering and the International Symposium on Empirical Software Engineering and Measurement, and she's a co-author of a book on sharing data and models in software engineering. Very welcome, Fiola. Delighted to have you. And last but not least, Dr. Yvonne Halpin joins us today as the head of the Irish Marie Curie Sklodowsky office. which is supported by the Irish Research Council and jointly operated with the IUA. Yvonne is the national delegate and national contact point for the Mary Sklogowski Curie Award in Ireland. And prior to joining the IUA, Yvonne worked in the private sector, in academic research, and as the Confirm Scientific Programme Manager in Science Foundation Ireland, where she gained extensive experience in pre- and post-award management of research funding programmes. Most recently, Yvonne worked in the British Embassy as a UK-Ireland Science and Innovation Officer. And Yvonne, you're also very welcome. We're delighted to have you. So, can you hear me all right? You're happy? Yeah, great. So listen, with those wonderful introductions, I think, we've got a very exciting lineup and very varied and interesting careers from our panel here this afternoon. So I suppose what I'd like to start with is kind of an opener for each of you, and whoever's happy to start, do. But what I suppose influenced you to undertake a career in research? What were the key factors, do you think, throughout your career that influenced you? And Owen, I might start with you then. Jump in.
Yeah, so I suppose I've always been a very curious person, trying to figure out how things work and so on. So even, I'd say, at primary school level, I was always going up to research. Now, my parents call it mischief, but I'd call it research. I remember, burning holes in my shoes and magnifying glasses and all this kind of stuff, so I was always very inquisitive. I got, I suppose, a bit of Lego then in my teens, and I got big into kind of automation and that kind of stuff, building systems, and I decided to go into mechanical engineering in UCD. I suppose while I was in UCD, I didn't have much industry experience because there was no co-op placement, but I got, I suppose, a lot of experience on research projects. And then with that then led to the opportunity to apply for PhD funding, which I was successful with, and then I suppose the rest is history, really.
And do your parents still call it mischief?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's great, fantastic. And we might pick up some of those points in a minute. Fiola, do you want to give us your thoughts on it?
For me, it's more, I guess, the teachers that I had. I started in, when I got to undergrad, the program that I was in, they highly encouraged you to go to grad school. So everything we did was in preparation for that. So every summer you had to apply for an internship. And for me, those internships just happened to be in labs around the city. So the first lab I ended up in was, I guess, a biology lab, where I got some busy work, where I was given the code necessary, MATLAB code, in order to create charts for the lab. And I had to sit through the professor explaining to me why this squiggly line is different from this squiggly line, and just looking at it and just thinking, but they look the same. How are they different? And every year after that, I ended up in another lab, mainly based on geography and history, so I spent a lot of time in data there, dealing with the GIS system, and that followed into, I guess, a public sector internship where I ended up in the transportation, applying what I learned in GIS the year before, and creating maps that highlight different things for the department itself. And then after that, when I first entered grad school, the first class I ended up in was data mining. And there you basically learned everything from a new language, computer science language, to LaTeX so that you can write a paper by the end of the semester. And this was my first graduate class. So I had to go through all of that, and after 3 months of just being frustrated and not knowing what I was doing, it finally clicked for me. Data is where I'm going to be at. You can't talk to me about anything else. Don't waste your time, and anybody in the room who knows me would also know that. Not even the weather. Don't bother talking to me about anything else. It's always raining. So it's fine. But for me, yeah, that's my research journey, and that what got me into it.
Very interesting, and I like the way you describe it as you ended up in a lab. I'm sure there's a little bit more strategy to it, or was there not?
Really. It's like the program I was in, you're going to go to grad school, okay. You have to apply, whether you get in or not, fine. But yes, every time I just ended up in a lab.
I think it's interesting because it resonates with what Philip said earlier, that your career doesn't tend to be that planned when you're in research, and I could certainly equate with that. An opportunity arises and you respond, and that sounds like it was very similar for you, Fiola, and similar probably for you too, Owen. Yep, and you just respond.
Exactly.
Great, Thank you for that. I'll hand over to Sarah, if you want to follow on, Sarah, about your experience. What influenced you to undertake the career in research?
Yeah, I think my journey is very, very Limerick-centric. I think I did applied physics here in UL. I started in 2011, and I think by the time I was coming through, that had sparked my discovery of the joy in science. So by the time I got to my co-op and my FYP, which I did out in analog devices in Raheen, that was getting me into the practical hands-on research of being a scientist. And again, that doing your first set of experiments that don't work and then do click, as Fiola said, is really what kicks it off. So by the time I came here and was doing my PhD, I knew that it was going to be physics, and that had been around for a long time. But I think the PhD and the postdoc as well, particularly with SSPC, got me into collaborative science and working with large research groups. Anybody here who knows me knows you can't talk to me for 15 minutes or I'll start doing science collaboration with you. So yeah, I think for UL it really kicked off the global research, the international research, and also the sustainability side of things, which is what I'm going to be doing from now on.
Great. It's fascinating, and all of you talking about that piece about clicking. When you talk about that joy in science, can you maybe, I know innately you know what that means, but can you maybe describe it a little bit more, maybe for people in the audience who may not be as familiar or not at that point yet where something has clicked for them? What do you mean when you say the joy of science?
I think a lot of people think that being a successful scientist means you do everything right, but doing successful science means you've done a lot of things wrong and then it's become right. And I have two key memories in my head. One of them is in like a second-year electronics lab where you have to make a series of lights, LEDs, light up in the correct order. And we spent 2 hours trying to make that happen, and it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and suddenly it all lit up, and that was the moment. And I had a moment in my PhD, so I do both molecular modeling, say in the computer, and then grow the same materials in the lab. And the first time that a material property that I'd predicted and seen on my computer came up on the screen in the lab in an experiment, I'll never forget it. I made it a figure in the paper just so everybody else could see that this number matched that number, and something that had started for me as something I typed into a computer was now a material with that property in the lab. So it's seeing yourself create something from nothing, I think, is the real joy of science. Yeah.
Fabulous. And for me as VPR, it's watching the joy in people's faces when they're talking about what they love most. And I've seen that. And what's been lovely at the moment is being able to physically go back out and visit people and get to know the rest of the university. And that's been really difficult in the last 2.5 years, as you can imagine. But it's that joy when I meet different parts of the research community and they light up. And you can see it in you as well, Sarah and Fiola, when you're talking about that piece clicking for you. It's fabulous. Thank you for that. Yvonne, I'll come to you now next if you want to tell us about what influenced you to come into a career in research.
Sure. I probably identify with a number of things that have been said already. And particularly, I didn't have a plan. Thank you for standing up there and saying that's okay. Because in thinking about this, I was like, God, I wish I could sound more strategic or something. But actually, it's okay when you're young to not have a plan and to figure things out. But for me, I guess I really enjoyed science in school, similar to that. Understanding how things work and that kind of fascination and curiosity, and chemistry and physics were definitely my favourite subjects for leaving cert and that kind of thing. Honestly didn't really know that a career in research was even a thing. But I remember I went to the open day in DCU and walked around the stalls and started reading about the different courses, and all of a sudden had this grand ambition that I was going to find a cure for cancer, which no mean feat. I didn't do it, by the way, just in case anyone's wondering. But that kind of led me into the course in DCU, and the lab work was definitely always my favourite out of the modules and all that kind of thing that I did, and I was definitely more suited to that. And I think one of the things in third year, we did a work placement, so I went to a pharmaceutical company for about 6 months, which was great. It was in a quality control position, good experience, but I just felt like it wasn't the fit for me. And then thankfully in final year, I did a 3-month research project. So all of a sudden I was in a lab with PhD students and learning all about that and getting to know them and their journey and getting really excited about it and enjoying the project. Definitely didn't want to pursue organic chemistry, no offense to any organic chemists in the room, but a position came up to apply for a PhD in molecular electronics, and I just thought it was really cool. Like, I just love science, and I know, over the long term, didn't necessarily stay proactively conducting research, but in my current role and looking back, definitely the theme running through it is just that love of science and that belief that research is needed for a prosperous economy and for societal well-being and all that kind of thing. So even though my path led me away from me being in the lab and conducting my own research, I learned that there's a way to actually still be able to positively impact on research, but at the more national level, that there's different avenues basically. But I still read all the books and all of that kind of stuff, so it's still in there at heart.
That's really interesting, Yvonne, and I think what you've picked up really key points there, particularly about not needing to have a plan, and I know it's great that Philip has told us we don't necessarily need to have a plan. Many of us have very unplanned careers, and you don't set out at 20 knowing where you're going to be at 40 or 50 or 60, and that's actually really valuable sometimes because it opens up opportunities. If you're not open to an opportunity, if you've closed it off too soon, then you can often close down really exciting opportunities, and you're someone who's had a very varied career, and that's lovely to show that you can have a very varied path, and that's a really exciting thing. And once you hold your passion at the core, that's what's really most important. So thank you for that. I might just move on to thinking about factors that are important when you established your career. And I might start with you, Sarah, if that's okay. Because you've picked up on some of these pieces, and there's choices that you've made along the way. There's maybe placements you've gone on, there's people you've met, there's conference you've gone to. Have you kind of maybe perceived words of wisdom at this point that you think might be valuable for our people maybe at an earlier stage to think about when you're establishing your career? What things are the most important, do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I think it's being a bit ambitious, and I think Irish people are bad at backing ourselves and being ambitious and even saying that you want to be ambitious, and it takes a lot of practice, and I think it's being ambitious in the science that you're doing, in terms of grand challenges, and like you said, like wanting a cure for cancer, it gets a lot of people into science and into our research centres. And it's surrounding yourself with people, backing yourself, and then surrounding yourself with people who back you too. But I think a lot of the best mentors I've had want me to succeed almost more than they want themselves to succeed. We have some very altruistic people in SSPC and Confirm and Lero who are amazing at pushing young scientists forward almost at all costs in a good way. I think, like everybody says, mentorship, and I completely agree with it, but mentorship can be luck. I think my postdoc supervisor, Damien Thompson, just absolute luck, but one of the best mentors that you can have as a young scientist, and I think it's educating young scientists to know who's looking out for you and pushing you forward and making you successful.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Sarah. And would you encourage people to, I suppose, formally seek out a mentor, or do you think mentorship is always that formal, or do you think it can be something that happens much more informally by the people you might meet in your wider circle? Like, I'm very curious about mentorship, and I've heard a lot of views on it, particularly, I suppose, when I was younger, the notion of mentorship at that early stage of your career didn't exist. So you maybe realised after that somebody was giving you some advice or direction. But I'm curious in your views of the formality of mentorship. How formal does it need to be?
Yeah, I think you need to look around you. Do you have a mentor currently? Is there somebody that you can see following through your career that's going to help you out? And I think if you don't have that, then you should seek it out. I think it can happen naturally, but I think it's perfectly okay to seek people out, particularly say it's like a woman in science. I'd say it's important to have at least one female mentor who can help you navigate those unique challenges, especially at our stage of research of the early career stage. But look around, especially because you can tend to keep your head down and say, what's my next paper, what's my next collaboration, when's my next promotion, when am I becoming a lecturer? But to stop for a second and look around and say, what do I have now, who do I have now, and what do I need in the present to reach those goals that I'm always thinking about?
And you're nodding, Owen, here, so I'm assuming you're connecting with what she's saying. Have you kind of similar thoughts around mentorship, and can I also get you to think a little bit about maybe the networks that you might have developed on your journey?
Yeah, so I suppose in terms of mentorship, I think it is very, very important. I suppose when we embark on a career in academia, you need to kind of look at, right, where do I want to go? Do I want to do pure research? Do I want to do a bit of lecturing? Do I want to go to industry? Where do I want to be? And then I suppose it's to try to identify a mentor in that space that can help guide. So I suppose when I came back to UL to confirm, I'd Connor as my mentor, and he was absolutely brilliant in terms of just pointing out, right, what you want to do. You want to be a lecturer? Okay, this is what you need to do. Keep, I suppose, going on your papers, your publications, your research, and so on. But don't forget doing maybe a bit of teaching as well on the side and so on. So it's all about trying to stack your workload in a way that, I suppose, over time you build up a portfolio, I suppose, to achieve your goals. What was the second?
The more networking international landscape, maybe particularly.
Yeah, so I suppose for my own personal career, my network would be more of an industrial network. So I mentioned my PhD was at Lufthansa Technik in Shannon, but then I was working with J&J for a couple of years as well. I'm with Analog Devices now, but I'm also linking with likes of Stryker and Cook and so on. So I've been always kind of sitting on that threshold between academia and industry, so I focus my network around that. I suppose in terms of international network, I'd say maybe Sarah could probably talk to that one, I suppose. So.
It's fine. And before I ask Fiola to come in, I would like to point out that we haven't paid Sarah and Owen to say how wonderful Connor and Damien are. Yeah. That's all of their own volition. Yeah. And I do agree, they are wonderful, but just want to point out, I didn't ask them to say that. So Fiola, just from your perspective, like the factors that helped you in your career, and I suppose particularly if you want to pick up the point about international networks and mentoring, what are your views and what are the key things that influenced your career to kind of be successful?
I guess for me, so the mentorship angle is important. So for me, mentorship comes in different forms. So looking around me at who's working around me and what positions they're in, looking at what they need to do in order to have those positions, and do I want to be that? And if I decide, yes, this is what I want to be, then they are the people I'm going to hang out with. Mentorship, so as a researcher, my network was mainly based in research. So, and in research is international. At least once a year, you're going to end up at a conference and you're going to meet someone from some other country. Even in your graduate studies, most of the people around you are international. So your network starts as a student, going to your first conference and just talking to people, even if it's distance around you, because they are going to be the future. They are the ones who you're going to be working with, or just working with as you mature in your field. So when I decided to make that switch from research to industry, I had to expand my network because a lot of people around me were not part of industry. Even though with Lero, you got introduced to people who are in industry, it was more in the perspective of, this is my research that I'm bringing to you. Are you interested? Rather than me knowing what is actually done on a day-to-day basis. So once I first decided this is the path I wanted to go down or follow, I found people through LinkedIn or that app Meetup, who I spoke to just to find out what they did and just to figure out whether or not this is what I want to do or I'm able to do. And so through that, I was able to meet someone who asked me the correct questions, like, where do you want to be? I want to be in Limerick. And basically, it helped narrow my search. So mentorship for me turns up in those angles, those aspects.
Great. It's fascinating listening to you, Fiola, because it is a very strategic approach, but you're very proactive. And I think that's an important lesson for people listening to all of you, that it's important to be proactive and I suppose to back yourself, as Sarah said, but also to, that proactivity is coming through is very clearly important. So that's very valuable. I'm just going to pause for a second and look to my left. Is anybody else who wants to jump in with a question at this point because I could talk to this crew for the whole afternoon. Brian.
So I think it's very interesting that in some countries that iteration back and forth, people go into industry and go back to research. So in some countries, Scandinavia, people go to industry, come back, go back and forth, I guess. So is that something you guys see yourselves doing? If you're in analog now, for example, would you consider coming back into research and use, or would you consider going to industry for a while? Do you see that as part of your future?
Yeah, so I suppose where I'm at the moment now is I actually am in between the two. So I'm doing a part-time industry fellowship. So half my week is in analog doing research in industry, and then the other half then is lecturing in UL. So I'm literally sitting across the two of them, which has been a great experience. It's been a very busy experience, but it's been fantastic. So I suppose my research career to date has either been in one or the other or across the two. So and that's pretty much where I intend to go. So I suppose my research area is smart manufacturing. So there's always going to be that link then with industry because it is about manufacturing. So.
That's fascinating. Someone who comes from a health background, and Philip and I were talking about this earlier about the value of people being able to work across their industry and academia, and that industry isn't always, in a typical way of us thinking about industry. Do you think that's something that we, mindful that we have Director General of a large funding agency in the audience? Do you think there's learning for us own in that we could think more concretely about how we could support that dual working, so to speak, or that cross-industry academic collaboration to be more formalised?
Yeah, absolutely. So industry, I suppose, have a huge demand for research. So I see it as two different areas. One is, I suppose, solving production problems that are there today, and the other is, I suppose, blue sky research, what's coming down the line. Confirm as Research Centre, in my experience, has been very focused on, I suppose, what's coming down the line, developing these new technologies that industry can pull in and use and monetize down the line. So I think it's very, very important that relationship between the two.
And Yvonne, from your perspective in the IUA, and what's your view around supporting mentoring? What are the key things you think at this early stage of someone's career are key to be thinking about? Or do you think we, as a cross-sectoral institutions, HEIs, funders, what are the key things we need to be doing to support at this stage?
A couple of thoughts on mentors, just to go back for a second. You're talking about formal mentors, but actually I found, I'm lucky enough to have formal mentors right back from my PhD supervisor, who I'm still in contact with, and then also mentors through the different positions I've had. But what I actually learned is that we all hopefully have a huge asset in our peers, actually, in terms of mentorship. And I mean, professional peers, but actually my friends I've turned to a lot. They're in management consultancy or other type of economics or history or whatever. A lot of very different, or by definition, very different sectors to what I'm in. But actually I leaned in heavily to those in terms of developing competencies and learning new skills and how to speak the different languages across the sectors and that kind of thing. But one thing that I found really helpful in making, I guess, going from a PhD to clinical trials industry, back to academic research, then into the public sector, the transferable skills are so important, and pay attention to them. And I think that's something actually that supervisors and formal mentors can do as well, is just to hone in on those. And you can still hear me, yeah. And even if you look at so for example, just to plug, because I am here for the MSCA, the Marie Sklodowska Actions. So the Commission, through that programme, puts a lot of training, or a lot of emphasis on training, not only your research skills necessary to do your project, but also those more transferable skills, so that you do have more opportunities for different roles across different sectors, and that you do have multiple career paths. Because the percentage of people, or PhD graduates, I should say, who don't stay in academia long term, that percentage is growing all the time. And I think it's just to things like this, like creating awareness that actually training in scientific research or a scientific career is so valuable across so many sectors. And just, talk to people in different types of roles. Look at your own friend group, and particularly if they studied other things in college or have gone down different career paths, and just find out a bit more about what they do, what's valued, what's useful. And it probably will open up a lot of it'll open up your eyes and then hopefully open up some doors as well. You never know.
Great words of advice there. Thanks very much, Yvonne. And we have a question from the back.
Thanks, Norley. So I suppose I have a little bit of insider knowledge or insider trading here with my question. I know Sarah and Fiola and Owen a long time, and I know you're all excellent communicators. I remember Fiola doing Pint of Science for Lero a few years ago, Owen similar, Sarah the Sophia Project. There's been an awful lot of talk this morning earlier at the panel discussion, and I think some of you have alluded to it a little bit today, about the importance of communication and the implications of this then in terms of engaging a public with you on key messages like we heard this morning in terms of working in the COVID pandemic, key messages in terms of what we were talking about earlier, policy. And I was just wondering, would any of you be able to speak to that, to the importance of that, being able to articulate and communicate your research, and has that helped you in your careers?
Yeah, I think at this point, I think any scientist has to be a science communicator, and I think they should be a science communicator. And I think it's particularly important for, like you said, actually reaching out to the public, that it doesn't become a KPI or it doesn't become just giving a talk, that it's actually influencing things around us and things that we want to change, in our country and around the world. So for me, as Sarah mentioned, my outreach project that I just took over is the Sophia Project here in UL, and that was founded by Grania Walsh in the physics department, who's now with the Irish Research Council. And that's very much targeted at primary and secondary school level students, breaking down their perceptions of physics and who can be a physicist, and that it's not an old man in a white coat, because we ask them to draw a scientist, and when we go to them, and it's always Einstein every time. But it's just to make sure that there's influence in the science communication, and that you're not losing yourself in the, have I done 2 science communication KPIs this semester? And I think the research centres in particular are very good at actually influencing policy and change in what we're doing, and also incorporating our research into our science communication when we go out to the public. Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I suppose from my own personal experience, I think when I finished my undergrad, I'd done 2 presentations in the 4 years. So I suppose my communication wouldn't have been fantastic at all, but I suppose going through a PhD, going to conferences, like, I don't know if anyone remembers their first conference presentation, but they're probably terrified, just standing in front of an audience, thinking they're going to be shredded apart. But over time in research, you do get that experience to present your research. And then again, as Sarah pointed out, in terms of identifying your audience, if you're talking at an international conference that's specialized on a topic, versus if you're going into a school to talk about something to secondary school students. It's all about trying to identify your audience, identify your message, and then I suppose communicating that across in terms of talk or your slides or whatever. So there's loads of different communication, I suppose, media out there as well. So.
Thanks very much, Owen. I think that's a nice segue into kind of another important topic, and I think you, Sarah, mentioned it earlier. But how do we, I suppose, better tackle or address the challenges that still exist around inclusion, diversity, gender? So I'm kind of curious about your thoughts, and you picked up on some of these here. We're talking about going to schools, talking about, the Sophia Project. Have you any other thoughts in general about what you think are kind of key things that need to be, I suppose, focused on more immediately? I'll start with Yvonne, if you're happy to.
It's quite a simple question.
Yeah, you've got 5 minutes. You've covered it all.
I guess, you could talk about it at an individual level, you could talk about it at an organisational level. From an organisational level, probably there's no one size fits all, I'd say, and there's great progress being made, across the universities in Ireland and other organisations, but what's required, I imagine, will be quite unique to each organisation. So critically assessing where you are, but one thing just to say is that it does require a culture change, and I think culture change, the best people to influence and lead are the leaders, and to lead from the top down, and people will follow when they see people in positions of influence to lead on that. There's I could speak to European funding. There's lots of positive initiatives going on there. And the European Commission is really reaffirming its commitment to gender equality in research and innovation, and particularly this has come on a lot stronger in Horizon Europe. Like, for example, they're making it as it's now part of the eligibility criteria that public organisations need a gender action plan, and that has to meet certain criteria. It has to be a published document, there has to be resources, you have to have provisions for collecting data and monitoring your progress and training and all that kind of thing. So that hopefully will filter down and have quite a positive impact on the organisations itself. But I don't have the panacea for this, definitely not, but I might hand over to some of my colleagues.
Any other thoughts from any other members?
I think there's two key points of the timeline that you need to address it, and I think one is at the primary school and the secondary school level and just kind of inherent biases, but then I think the other point is right where we are now, and I think it's not only a lot of the great work that's being done with Athena Swan and diversifying hires and SALI professorships, but it's also creating an actual work environment and culture where that actual diversity culture can thrive. So you can hire people as much as you want, but if they're then leaving because your environment isn't accessible or it isn't positive or it isn't actually truly diverse, then you're going to just lose those people again. So I think we're doing great work now, but we need to really think about our work culture and accessibility and how we keep the people that we're actually trying quite hard now to hire and get in.
Indeed. Any other thoughts?
I would say as well, like you said before, it's not something that's new. I'm sure it's been going on for many decades, and I mean, at this point you wonder why it's still an issue. But well, I mean, I do know why, because I have witnessed like maybe a professor discouraging young women from continuing into computer science because maybe they asked a question that maybe he thought they should have known the answer to. So, like you said, culture is important, and also removing the idea that what we do is difficult. There are challenges, yes, but it's reading and writing. The majority of it is reading and writing. And one thing I do know is one thing that has been shared with me is that as long as you're able to read, you can teach yourself about anything. So you just don't allow the younger people to believe that they are not able to do something because of how they were born. So that is one thing. I know coming from Lero, there's Ita, maybe you know Ita Richardson, and she would like basically take us out of the lab and take us to schools, and where she would teach the young, I guess, primary school children that engineering science is not difficult, it can be fun. And just to help remove that idea that you cannot access it, to be able to just get past the gatekeepers and not believe any lies that has been told to you.
And again, Ita, we know I have not paid Viola to say Ita is brilliant, but she actually is brilliant. Genuinely, I would second exactly what Viola said. I think you're absolutely right, that engagement, that connectivity with people is just so important. If I might, I also think, while there's been lots of difficulties with COVID, I think what my observation in 17 years in academia is that the last 2 years have, I suppose, opened up the reality of people as academics like never before. So through Zoom, we've seen each other's lives, we've heard our children, other people's children, and it's been fabulous to learn about our colleagues as real people. You know, I'm old enough to be able to remember when I had younger children who were not that old, when you kind of hid them when they were sick. You know, you had the practicalities of running out the door to a sick child, trying to pretend that everything was okay, and you managed. And as what's been lovely about COVID, if it doesn't sound too horrible a thing to say, you know, is that we've realised that flexibility in a workplace has been hugely beneficial for so many people, and not only for people who have children, people who want to, you know, do other things in their lives or who maybe have other caring responsibilities. So I think we have to, you know, take those positives, because I think a lot of, you know, people and maybe more likely women have found the lack of flexibility, particularly in academia, maybe the old ways of doing things that were the all-nighters and the all-that-way approach, prohibitive. So I think personally I found that very valuable, and I've just really enjoyed, because as a physiotherapist I've always enjoyed working with people and talking to people, and I'm very curious about people, so I've loved that insight into people's lives that I think COVID has given all of us, and we've all particularly enjoyed it. So I found it very valuable. So I think your insights are really interesting. at this point in time. Christina was looking at me about time, so I need to move on. I think we have one more question from the audience, and Hugh.
No pressure. So my question, I hope it's relevant to at least two on the panel, I think. On the research side, so the difference from carrying out research, say as a PhD student or a postdoc, and then moving to the next stage, so being a PI and leading research, is there anything that has surprised you or terrified you or you know, pick your adjective almost on that? And I was looking at Sarah, so I know you're there.
Yeah. I think, like Fiola said, I think I'm one of those people who science is constantly being demystified for as I go through the process. So even as a PhD student who is in a very diverse international research group of people from all around the world, when I became a PI and put out ads for PhD students and postdocs and realized that people were going to travel from other parts of the planet to Limerick to live here to do research that I'd written about, like at home during lockdown, was mind-blowing. So I think I'm constantly being amazed that it's still exciting and that it's still similar to what I said about things clicking or things not working and then working, people coming to realize your vision and again creating something that you've created from nothing is still really powerful. So I think that and a lot more emails, so many more emails. But yeah, that'd be me. Yeah.
So I suppose my position, I found it important to realise that collaboration is key. So you can't be an expert in everything, you know, so you need to be able to draw on other people who have expertise in the area. So in smart manufacturing, for example, there's a lot of simulation and modelling, and there's machine learning, and there's AI, and there's mechanical design and all this, and you can't be an expert of it all. So by essentially collaborating with different departments, different people and so on, I think that really helps kind of manage the burden of research. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I'm very conscious of time, but we had a very similar conversation this morning at the HRI panel about the value of data, but the importance of the different disciplines working together and working in that interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary way is the way to address the bigger challenges in society. So I think COVID has also taught us the value of that. So thank you all. We do need to finish, but before we do, can I ask each of you just for maybe a one or two line, I suppose, final thoughts or something you would definitely like earlier career people to hear at this point in time that you think would be of value for them. So I'll start with you, Yvonne.
Probably, I'd say allow yourself the freedom to actually think about what motivates you, what sector you think you would actually be, I'm going to say happy. Nobody's happy every day at their job, but overall content or satisfied in. And when you're doing that, just, I learned it the hard way, but I got a good piece of advice from a mentor years ago, was to just be your authentic self. I know that sounds like a bit of a cliche, but I think it's something that we underestimate in terms of reflection, decision-making about what you think you want your next move to be, sitting in an interview, trying to, like, creating new partnerships through your network, anything like that. Like, I think you cannot fail if you are authentically yourself. So that would be
fantastic. Thank you, Yvonne. Sarah?
Yeah, very similar. I think back yourself, follow things that excite you, surround yourself with people who are as excited about you and your goals as you are.
Great, well done, Sarah. Thank you. Fiola?
I guess I can just share what has been shared with me. That the first thing that you do, at least one of the first things that you do each day, be reading and writing in whatever domain that you're in, even if you only have about 15 minutes to spare. Another thing that I've learned also that's helped me with where I am now is learn the best practices of anything that you're doing. It saves time.
Practical as well as philosophical. Thank you, Fiola. And Owen, finally.
I suppose persistence, stay persistent. So I suppose in a career of research, there are plenty of knockbacks, papers being rejected, funding, you're not getting it and so on, but it's important to kind of use these as opportunities to take on board that feedback, build it, improve it, and then I suppose go forward with it. So. stay persistent. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Owen. Listen, unfortunately we're out of time, but I mean the real privilege of being VPR of UL is that I get to chair sessions like this and meet this fantastic group of people who are inspiring as our future. So thank you all very much. It genuinely is a privilege to listen to you all, and I'm sorry we don't have more time, but you know, we may run sessions like this again. So it's been a privilege, and thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.